The rain came down in sheets as Nolan Ehlers yanked off his threadbare hoodie and held it over the woman standing at the curb, her silk blouse already clinging to her like a second skin. "You'll catch your death out here," he said, his voice rough from the cold, his 6-year-old son clinging to his leg. The woman blinked up at him, startled. "What?" "You don't have an umbrella," Nolan nodded toward the sky. "Here." He stretched the hoodie out further, covering her head and shoulders, ignoring how the rain soaked his own shirt. "Come on, there's a diner across the street. You can dry off inside." She hesitated, eyes scanning him wet t-shirt, faded jeans, a kid in a too-small jacket before she nodded. "All right." They dashed across the street, Nolan shielding her the whole way until they ducked into the tiny diner. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and warmth hit them like a wall. Nolan looked down at his son. "Benny, you good?" "I want pancakes," Benny said immediately, shaking the rain from his hair. Nolan chuckled and ruffled his hair. "You'll have to settle for a grilled cheese, bud." The woman, now brushing wet hair from her face, looked at Nolan again. "That was really kind of you." He shrugged, still shivering. "Just didn't want to see someone drown." She smiled, and something about it warm, genuine caught him off guard. "I'm Elara Pierce," she said, holding out her hand. He shook it, his hand rough and calloused compared to her soft one. "Nolan Ehlers, and this is Benny." Benny gave her a suspicious side eye. "Are you a stranger?" "I guess I am," she said with a soft laugh. "But I'm a nice one, I promise." Nolan ordered Benny's grilled cheese and a coffee for himself. Elara added a slice of pie to the order and pushed it toward Benny without a word. His eyes lit up. "Thank you," Nolan said, then added, "You don't have to do that." "I wanted to." Her eyes lingered on his face. "You didn't have to help me either." He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were in the booth. "So, what were you doing out in that mess?" "I had a meeting nearby," she said quickly. "It ran late. I wasn't expecting the storm." Nolan nodded. "Yeah, weather does whatever it wants these days." Elara tilted her head. "What about you? You live close." "A few blocks. I was picking Benny up from his school, then we had to stop by the hardware store. Got caught in it on the way out." "You always carry strangers through storms," she teased, lifting her coffee. He gave a small laugh. "Only the ones who look like they're about to get struck by lightning." She smiled again. "Lucky me." The waitress dropped off the food. Benny immediately dove into the pie, smearing whipped cream across his cheek. "Tell me something," Elara said, watching Nolan with curious eyes. "What do you do?" He hesitated. "Used to be in construction, got laid off last year. Now pick up whatever jobs I can. Painting, moving furniture, handyman stuff." She didn't blink. "And your wife?" "Passed away 3 years ago." He kept his voice even. Elara's expression softened. "I'm sorry." He gave a small nod. "Thanks." There was a beat of silence between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "You're doing a great job," she said quietly, watching Benny munch on his sandwich now. "He's sweet." "He's my whole world," Nolan said simply. When the rain eased, Nolan helped Benny into his hand-me-down coat and turned to Elara. "You need a ride somewhere? I've got an old truck a block down." She hesitated again, then nodded. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's not." He led her to his beat-up pickup, opening the passenger door for her, then helping Benny into the back. The inside smelled faintly of motor oil and bubblegum. Elara didn't complain. "Where to?" he asked once they were inside. "Upper West Side," she said, almost reluctantly. He raised a brow but didn't comment. "Fancy." "It's temporary," she said. He drove in silence for a few minutes, glancing at her once. "You from New York?" "Born and raised, you." Brooklyn still there. He pulled up in front of a towering brownstone with a doorman. She looked at him. Thank you again for everything. He gave her a nod. No problem. She started to open the door, then paused. Would you let me take you and Benny to dinner sometime? He blinked. Dinner. Just a thank you. You saved me from drowning, remember? Nolan hesitated. He didn't do dinners with strangers, especially not ones who lived in buildings with doormen. But Benny piped up from the back. Can I come too? Elara smiled. Of course. Nolan looked at her again, really looked. Her blouse was expensive, her heels soaked but clearly designer. She wasn't just passing through, she belonged in that world. Still, something about her didn't scream rich girl. Maybe it was the way she looked at Benny, or the way she didn't flinch when he mentioned his job. All right, he said finally, but only if Benny picks the restaurant. She grinned. Deal. As she stepped out, she turned back one last time. I meant what I said. You're a good dad. And then she disappeared into the building. Nolan drove off, his son already humming in the back seat, and his mind oddly full of the woman he'd met in the rain. He didn't know her last name, didn't know that the brownstone wasn't temporary, didn't know her net worth had 8 digits. All he knew was that she smelled like rain and something expensive, and that for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at him like he wasn't broken. And that felt like something. 2 days passed before Elara saw him again. She stood on the far side of the schoolyard fence, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth as children spilled onto the pavement after dismissal. Her assistant had begged to send someone in her place, but Elara had shaken her head. No assistant in the world could substitute for curiosity, or for the strange pull she hadn't been able to shake since that night. She spotted Benny first, dragging a lopsided backpack and scanning the pickup line with narrowed eyes. He spotted her a second later and stopped short, clearly confused. Where's your dad? She asked gently as he approached. He's late. He had to drop off a set of blueprints. Said he'd be here in 10 minutes. Elara crouched beside him, brushing a leaf off his shoulder. Mind if I wait with you? He studied her for a moment before nodding. You're the pie lady. I guess I am, she said, and you're the grilled cheese guy. He cracked a grin, and they sat together on the low edge of a planter box, watching the sun dip behind the buildings. 10 minutes later, a rust-colored pickup pulled into the lot, backfiring once before sputtering to a stop. Nolan jumped out, tugging off a work glove and tossing it into the cab before striding toward them. Elara, his brows raised as he spotted her beside Benny. I figured I owed you that dinner, she said, standing and brushing dust from her coat, or at least a proper invitation. Nolan looked between her and his son. You came all the way here. I was in the neighborhood. He gave a short laugh. Is that so? Benny tugged on his sleeve. She waited with me, like a babysitter, but fancy. Nolan glanced at Elara again, slower this time. You're serious? She nodded. There's a place in Soho, family-friendly, booths, and they serve something called truffle mac and cheese that I've been dying to try. I don't own anything truffle-worthy, he said. They let in people with muddy boots. I checked. He hesitated. Benny's got homework. Bring it, I'll quiz him between courses. He looked at his son, who was already climbing into the truck with the enthusiasm of someone promised cheese. Then he looked back at Elara. Fine, he said, but I'm not ordering anything I can't pronounce. She leaned closer. Neither am I. The restaurant wasn't the sort of place Nolan would have ever set foot in on his own. The lighting was soft, the waitstaff crisp and efficient, and the prices noticeably missing from the menu. But Benny was too busy marveling at the cloth napkins folded like swans to notice his father's unease. Nolan kept his hands on the table, resisting the urge to check under it for gum out of habit. Elara watched him with amusement as he scanned the wine list like it was written in Latin. "Let me," she said, gently taking it from him. "They've got a house red that won't scare you." "I'm not scared," he muttered, "just cautious." "You look like someone who drinks beer from a bottle." "Is that a problem?" "No," she said, "it's refreshing." Benny dove into the bread basket, and Elara helped him spread butter on a slice, so thick it flopped over his fingers. "I should have brought my own fork," Nolan said, eyeing the gold cutlery. "I think this one costs more than my truck." Elara laughed, "Then don't drop it." As the evening wore on, the sharp edges between them softened. Nolan told a story about Benny trying to build a birdhouse that ended up as a squirrel condo. Elara shared an embarrassing moment involving a broken heel at a museum gala. "What do you do anyway?" Nolan asked finally, leaning back as dessert arrived. Elara hesitated, then responded carefully. "Consulting. I work with art foundations, help acquire pieces, manage private collections." "Sounds complicated." "It can be, but it's also beautiful." He nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. "Explains the heels." "Explains a lot of things." He didn't press further, but she caught the flicker of curiosity he tried to hide. She didn't volunteer the rest. After dinner, they walked back to the truck. Benny skipped ahead, spinning in circles with a sugar high from his third scoop of gelato. "You didn't have to pay," Nolan said as they reached the curb. "I wanted to." He frowned. "I don't want you feeling like you owe me something." "I don't," she said, "but I wanted to have dinner with you, that's all." He studied her for a long moment. "This isn't your world, Elara, not really." "And it's not yours either, but here we are." He opened the truck door for Benny, then turned back to her. "You're not like most people I've met." "Neither are you." He hesitated. "You sure you want to get involved with someone who can't even afford to fix his heater?" "I didn't say I wanted to get involved," she said, stepping closer. "I said I wanted dinner." "And after dinner." "I'll let you know." She reached up and gently fixed the collar of his jacket, her fingers brushing his neck. His breath hitched just once. Then she stepped back. "Drive safe." He didn't move for a moment after she walked away. Benny was already half asleep in the back seat, clutching a folded napkin like a treasure. Nolan got in, started the truck, and stared at the steering wheel. He didn't know how she'd found him, or why. But he had a feeling this wasn't the last time he'd be seeing Elara Pierce. Nolan gripped the edge of the workbench as he stared at the numbers on the invoice. The radiator installation had taken all afternoon, and the client tipped in cash, but even with that, the balance in his checking account wouldn't stretch through the week. Not after rent hit. He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck, the workshop's single flickering bulb doing little to chase the dull ache pressing behind his eyes. The door creaked open, and Benny bounded in with his sneakers untied, and a sheet of paper clutched in his hand. "I got picked," he announced, waving the paper like a trophy. "For the art showcase. Miss Delaney said mine's going in the front window." Nolan forced a smile and crouched to read the note. "That's great, bud. What you draw?" "A hawk flying over the city. Tried to make the feathers look real, like you showed me." "You nailed it," Nolan said, ruffling his hair. Benny leaned in. "Is Elara coming to see it?" Nolan paused. "I don't know, she might be busy with work." "She said she liked birds." "I'll ask her." Benny nodded, satisfied, and darted back into the hallway, calling for the leftover noodles in the fridge. Nolan straightened slowly, glanced at the invoice again, then reached for his phone. He hesitated only a second before dialing. When Elara picked up, her voice was low and distracted, like she was mid-thought. "Hello. It's Nolan." There was a pause, then a smile in her tone. "Hey. I wasn't calling for anything fancy. Just, Benny's got a drawing going up in some school thing. He asked if you'd want to come." "I'd love to. It's nothing big. I still want to see it." He lowered his voice. "You sure you want to show up at a public school in heels?" "I'll wear sneakers. I own some." "Color me shocked." She laughed softly. "What day?" "Thursday, 5:30. "I'll be there." He hung up before he could talk himself out of it. Thursday came with a cold snap, the kind that made the heating vents rattle like they were coughing up ghosts. Nolan wrapped Benny in his warmest jacket, the one with the missing zipper tab, and carried his own coat under one arm. They reached the school gym just as the lights buzzed on overhead. The makeshift gallery was strung together with drying lines and clothespins. Construction, paper birds, and watercolors of bridges fluttered gently under box fans. Nolan spotted Benny's hawk almost immediately. It was bold, sharp, and a little too big for the paper. Wings stretched past the edge like it refused to be contained. "Looks like someone drew from life," a voice said beside him. He turned. Elara stood in dark jeans and a navy coat, her hair pulled back in a twist, eyes on the picture. "I told you it wasn't fancy," Nolan said. "I didn't come for fancy." Benny ran up, his eyes wide. "You came." "Of course," she said, kneeling beside him. "You didn't tell me it was this cool." He grinned, then tugged her toward the juice table. Nolan watched them, arms crossed, unsure what to do with the warmth crawling up his spine. Later, after the art show ended and the halls had emptied, Elara walked with them to the truck. The wind had picked up, and she pulled her coat tighter around her. "Do you ever paint?" she asked suddenly. He glanced at her, "Not since before Benny." "You should." "Doesn't pay the bills." "Not everything has to." He leaned against the side of the truck, his breath misting in the cold. "You ever get tired of it?" "What?" "The money, the events, making polished conversation with people who think a utility bill is a metaphor." She laughed under her breath, "More often than I admit." "Then why keep doing it?" She looked at him, really looked. "Because I don't know what I'd be if I stopped." He nodded slowly. "That's honest." She tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "What if I asked you to let me help?" "With what?" "Anything, Benny's supplies, the heater, groceries for the week." "No." "You didn't let me finish." "I don't have to." She stepped closer. "You helped me, you didn't ask questions, you didn't care what I wore or where I lived, you just helped." "That doesn't mean I want a handout." "It wouldn't be." "Then what would it be?" "A choice," she said. "Mine." He looked away, jaw tight. "I don't want to fix your life," she said quietly. "I just want to be in it." Nolan didn't speak for a long moment. Then he turned, opened the truck door, and helped Benny climb in. When he shut it, he looked back at her. "Come by Saturday," he said. "We'll be home." She tilted her head. "What's Saturday?" He gave a faint shrug. "Grilled cheese night." Elara smiled. "I'll bring the pie." Saturday came clear and cold, the kind of day where the sun looked warmer than it felt. Nolan had been up since dawn, scraping old paint from the window frames, while Benny sat on the front stoop with his sketchpad balanced on his knees. By the time the noon light shifted through the slats of the blinds, he'd swept, done the dishes, and fixed the loose hinge on the hallway closet things he'd been meaning to do for weeks. He told himself it was just because someone was coming over. Not someone, Elara. At 4:30, Benny was still asking if the living room looked cool enough, and Nolan was silently cursing the dent in the coffee table when a knock sounded on the door. She wasn't dressed up. That was the first thing Nolan noticed when he opened it. No sharp tailoring or sleek heels, just jeans, a soft sweater, and a paper bag tucked under one arm. "I brought the pie," she said, lifting it slightly, "and something else." He stepped aside to let her in, catching the faint scent of vanilla and something citrus as she passed. Benny jumped up from the armchair. "What else did you bring?" Elara pulled a flat box out of the bag and held it toward him. Charcoal pencils, the good kind, with different weights. Benny took it reverently, eyes wide. "Are these the ones with the blending sticks?" "Yup." He looked up at his dad. "Can I try them now?" Nolan nodded, and Benny raced to his corner of the living room, already peeling the lid off the box like it held treasure. "You didn't have to do that," Nolan said quietly as she slipped off her coat. "I wanted to," she said, setting the pie on the counter. "He's got talent." They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the scent of grilled cheese already curling from the pan. "You cook?" she asked, peeking at the stovetop. "I've got 3 specialties," he said, flipping a sandwich. "This is one." "What are the other 2? "Scrambled eggs and pancakes, shaped like dinosaurs." She smiled. "You should open a restaurant, call it Dad's Diner." He huffed a laugh. "You'd be my only customer." "I'd bring friends." She leaned against the counter. "Friends with very big appetites." They ate at the table Nolan had built himself during the first winter after Benny was born, its legs a little uneven, its top stained in places from years of glue and crayons. Elara didn't blink, just sliced the pie after dinner and asked Benny about his favorite bird to draw. "Ospreys," he said through a mouthful of whipped cream. "They're like hawks, but they dive." "Like torpedoes," Nolan added. He saw one upstate once, spent the next 2 weeks drawing fish with terrified expressions. Benny snorted, almost choking on a berry. After the dishes were done, Benny curled up with his sketch pad, and Elara joined Nolan on the tiny couch. The silence between them wasn't tense or awkward, it was full, like a held breath neither of them wanted to exhale just yet. Nolan stretched one arm along the back of the couch, but didn't touch her. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" She didn't ask what he meant. "Sometimes, but I've built a life. People rely on me." He nodded, "Same." She turned to him. "You know, I didn't plan to stay that night after the diner. I was going to leave town." "Why didn't you?" "I couldn't stop thinking about a man who gave up his only dry jacket to a stranger, who didn't flinch when I said I lived behind a doorman. I didn't care about that." "Exactly." Her voice had softened, and when she turned to look at him, her expression was clear. "I'm not offering charity," she said, "and I'm not here out of guilt or boredom or curiosity." "I know. I can't promise you this won't get messy, that people won't talk or judge or ask questions you don't want to answer. I've lived through worse." She took a breath. "Then I'm telling you now, I want this. Not for a day or a week, not until the shine wears off." Nolan didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached for her hand and linked their fingers together. "I want that too," he said. Later, after Benny had fallen asleep on the couch with charcoal smudges across his forehead, Nolan walked Elara to the door. The hallway light flickered overhead, casting a faint golden halo around her. "You don't have to go," he said. She looked up at him. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking if you'd ever consider making this a little more permanent." Her brows lifted, but not in surprise. "What does permanent mean to you?" "Not waking up wondering if you'll disappear," he said. "Letting Benny draw you into every picture, starting something we don't have to explain to anybody else. She stepped closer. You haven't asked what I'm worth. I've seen what you're worth. That was the only answer she needed. 3 weeks later, they stood in the middle of a small backyard in Brooklyn, surrounded by neighbors holding paper cups and folding chairs. Benny wore a bow tie and handed out napkins. Nolan wore a navy blazer borrowed from a friend. Elara wore a simple dress that didn't try to impress anyone and still left him breathless. There was no orchestra, no chandelier, just a string of lights, a homemade arch, and a kiss that made everything else disappear. When they danced, the music came from a speaker plugged into a long extension cord. Benny sat on the porch steps, sketching the scene with a broad smile. Elara leaned into Nolan's chest and tilted her head to whisper, I never thought getting soaked in the rain would be the best thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her hair. I did. And for once in his life, Nolan Ehlers wasn't worried about tomorrow. Not when today had finally given him someone that felt like more than just survival. It felt like home. The first time Nolan stepped into Elara's world, it was for Benny. A month after the backyard wedding, an envelope arrived with a thick ivory invitation tucked inside. The Metropolitan Gallery was hosting a private fundraiser, and Elara had been asked to curate a centerpiece exhibit featuring emerging young artists. Benny's hawk drawing, now framed and professionally matted, was one of 5 children's pieces to be displayed alongside the adult works, part of a new initiative Elara had championed quietly for weeks. I don't belong in a place like that, Nolan said, eyeing the invitation like it might bite. You belong anywhere your son is celebrated, she said, gently tucking the envelope into his coat pocket. And I'm not going without you. He spent the next 3 days dreading it. Elara, for her part, never pressured him. She simply laid out a charcoal gray suit on the bed one evening with a note that only said, "Wear me." The night of the event, Benny was dressed in a tiny blazer and clip-on tie, bouncing with excitement as Elara adjusted the collar. She wore a sleek black gown, simple but striking, with her hair swept up and a delicate silver pendant resting on her collarbone. Nolan watched her from across the room as he tightened his cuffs, the suit stiff but well-fitted. You're staring, she said, catching his eye in the mirror. I'm trying to figure out how got this lucky. She turned, eyes soft. You stopped waiting for the storm to pass and stepped into it. They arrived at the gallery in a town car, Elara's compromise, since Nolan refused a limousine. The building glowed beneath spotlights, its glass facade glittering with reflections of the city skyline. A line of photographers snapped shots as guests stepped onto the carpet. Elara took Nolan's hand, steady and sure, and didn't let go. Inside, beneath vaulted ceilings and suspended sculptures, Nolan caught snippets of conversations about auction bids and restoration techniques. He kept his shoulders square and his voice calm, even when a man in a navy velvet jacket asked if he was sponsoring one of the youth artists. I'm his father, Nolan said, gaze steady, and her husband. The man flushed and offered a hasty congratulations before disappearing into the crowd. Elara leaned in. You handled that better than I would have. I've had practice biting my tongue. You'll need it. These people eat caviar like it's trail mix. Benny's drawing hung in a central alcove, perfectly lit. When he spotted it, he ran to it with wide eyes, then turned back to Nolan. They put it in the middle. I see that. I'm in the middles. You're the hawk, Nolan said. Always have been. Later, Elara took the mic to speak. Nolan stood at the back, watching as she addressed the crowd with a quiet elegance that never felt rehearsed. She spoke about preserving creativity in young minds, about giving voices to those who hadn't yet learned to speak loudly. She paused only once when her eyes met his. I didn't understand the value of true art until, I started paying attention to the people who didn't live inside white walls, she said. Sometimes, the most powerful stories come from the ones no one expects. The applause was thunderous. Nolan clapped too, not for the speech or the spotlight, but for who she was, the woman who'd walked into a rainstorm and never looked back. That night, they returned home long after midnight. Benny was already asleep in the back seat, his sketchpad clutched to his chest. Nolan carried him up the stairs while Elara unlocked the door. The apartment was still, the city a quiet hum outside the windows. Once Benny was tucked into bed, Elara curled beside Nolan on the couch, her bare feet tucked beneath her, the hem of her gown pooled on the floor. "You still think you don't belong in my world?" she asked, looking at him beneath lowered lashes. "No," he said, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "I think we built a new one." She reached up, fingers sliding into his hair. "Good, because I'm not planning on leaving it." He leaned in, kissed her slow and deep, until the weight of the evening melted between them. "I've been thinking," she said when they finally pulled apart. "Dangerous." She smiled. "What if we moved?" He raised an eyebrow. "You want to leave the brownstone?" "I want to build something that's ours, not borrowed, not inherited. A place where Benny has space to draw on the walls if he wants, where your tools aren't crammed into a corner." He blinked. "You serious?" "I've been looking, quietly. There's a property in Brooklyn near the park, big backyard, needs work." His grin was slow, genuine. "I think I know a guy." "You think he'd give me a good rate?" "Only if you feed him grilled cheese." "Done." They closed on the house 6 weeks later. It needed new floors, a roof patch, and a complete kitchen overhaul. Nolan tackled it room by room, Elara by his side with blueprints and coffee. Benny claimed the attic as his studio, painting the walls in wide swaths of color until it looked like a sunrise exploded indoors. On the first night, they slept there on a mattress laid directly on the floor. With boxes still unopened around them, Elara curled into Nolan's chest and whispered, "We built this." He kissed her forehead. "We did." Years passed. The gallery offered Elara a directorship. She turned it down, choosing instead to launch a foundation that funded art programs in public schools. Nolan's business grew. He hired 2 employees, bought a second truck, and stopped apologizing for the calluses on his hands. Benny's work was displayed in his first real exhibit before he turned 13. They hosted barbecues in the backyard, planted a garden that only ever produced cherry tomatoes, and painted the front porch together every spring. Nolan added a treehouse. Elara added another bookshelf. Benny added a puppy named Orbit. And every night, without fail, Nolan would press a kiss to Elara's temple and say, "Still here." And every time she'd answer, "Always." Because the rain had passed, and the life they made this messy, vivid, ordinary miracle was exactly what neither of them knew they'd been waiting for.